Welcome everyone to this sneak peek at UWorld's live CPA Boot Camps. It's a brand new feature in our Elite Unlimited and Elite Unlimited Plus course packages that we're going to talk about today. My name is Madeline Cheesum, and I am a product marketing manager here at UWorld. And if you're a CPA candidate and you're looking for the right review course, this is a great presentation for you to find out one of our exclusive new features. If you are a current existing UWorld CPA course member, student, this is also a great presentation for you. It's an opportunity to learn about this new feature, and we just want to encourage you to take advantage of it and join us. I'm joined by three of our subject matter experts that I will introduce you to in just a moment. But just to let you know, before we get going, I do have my colleague in the background, Julie Snow. She is here to answer any questions in the chat for you, and then we might also ask some questions live throughout the presentation. So please go ahead and ask your questions there, and we will address them in the background and possibly live. So just a quick look at our agenda for today. We will start with a brief overview of who is UWorld. I will keep that part really brief, just let you know what we're all about and who we are and how we're going to help you pass the CPA exam. And then we'll jump right into talking about the CPA boot camps. You will hear from each of our presenters here today who are instructors for the boot camps, Aud, FAR, and Reg. And we'll talk a little bit about getting ready for the exam and finally open for questions at the end. So who is here with me today? We have Jeannie Yamamara, who is our bootcamp instructor for the Aud section. We have Peter Olinto, who is here to talk about the FAR section and is the instructor there. And then we also have two instructors for our Reg section. Greg Carnes is not with us today, but Suzanne Youngberg is, and she will be representing, talking about the Reg section of our boot camp series. So real quick, who is UWorld? UWorld is a leader in education technology. We've helped over 2 million pass their high stakes exams. And these high stakes exams, they cover a wide range of industries, from medical to nursing to legal, pharmacy. We even have college prep, college readiness, those AP classes, SAT, all kinds of high stakes exams that we cover. We here today are from the UWorld Accounting and Finance vertical. And we cover in this vertical the CPA, CMA, CIA, CFA, and CMT high stakes exams. Of course, today we're talking about CPA, but just a little bit of background on the vertical here. Many of you may have known several of the entities that are reputable entities that have come together to make this incredible series of course offerings. We have Rogers CPA Review, which was acquired by UWorld several years ago, Wiley Efficient Learning, and then of course we were joined by, who's here today, Peter Olinto, a leading instructor in CPA and CFA exam prep. And finally, many of you have heard that the exam drastically changed in 2024. And at the end of last year, we did launch an all-new, brand new course. And these boot camps are a feature within this all-new course. It's a brand new feature within this course. We boast an expert team of accounting educators, practicing CPAs, several that are here with us tonight. We have streamlined content that clearly maps to the AICPA blueprints, so we make sure that you know exactly what you need to do to pass all the different aspects that are within the AICPA blueprints. And overall, we have boasted a proven 94% pass rate on our exams, so you know that you're in good hands. But today we are going to talk about the live CPA boot camps. So what are these new boot camps? They are live, interactive online classes, and they're an exclusive feature within our Elite Unlimited and Elite Unlimited Plus course. This provides live opportunities to interact with instructors, ask questions, and then we do provide recordings within 48 hours of each of these sessions. Each of your instructors are, they're an expert specializing in each of the core boot camps that we offer. And this is a great opportunity for you to refresh your knowledge on the most frequently tested content areas. So if you are working in a specific area like tax, for example, the content that you saw in school may not be top of mind, but boot camps are a great refresher to bring the concepts back to the front of your brain and make that information easily readable. Strategies to master the most challenging MCQs and TBSs. There's going to be tips for these all along the way, and you'll be drilling on several questions with your instructor. And then ultimately, test-taking skills. Here you'll be getting expert advice on how to take on each of these sections, because for many of you, it might have been several years since you were in college, where back then maybe you were an expert on taking exams, but times change, you get into your career, and maybe some of those skills have faded a little bit. So this is a great opportunity to get back up to speed.
Oh, Matt, can I just embarrass my two co-presenters here today?
Absolutely.
So when you talk about credentials, so that would be Dr. Jeannie to you, Mad, PhD. Come on, are you kidding me? And if you want to talk about tax, you're talking about the person who actually wrote the book. So Suzanne and Greg, authors of one of the most popular selling individual entity tax books. So, man, you are in great hands, boys. So this is one heck of a team UWorld has put together. Let's go.
Absolutely. And thank you for adding that, Pete. Yes, we are so proud of the team that we have here. You are in really good hands, very good hands. Okay, so how do you access the how do you access these boot camps? So if you are a student within our Elite Unlimited or Elite Unlimited Plus courses, you will see on the left-hand side of your navigation a section called Events. And that is where you can see all the upcoming classes and where you can RSVP to join those classes. Now, if you are, as I mentioned, one of our students, but you don't have access to this feature, you may not have the Elite Unlimited or Elite Unlimited Plus access. We do provide the opportunity to upgrade. All you need to do is contact our customer care team and we'll take care of you. And finally, before I pass on to my co-presenters here today, we have a schedule of the upcoming live boot camp schedule. So you'll see the classes here for the spring that are coming up. We have some as early as next week, April 16th, and each boot camp is about 2 hours, and they're scheduled on the weeknights to accommodate busy accounting schedules. And you can find the full schedule online at the link provided at the bottom there, which we will include in a follow-up email by the next day or two. And that's all I have for me for right now. I'm going to pass on the presenting role to Jeannie. So please, Jeannie, join us.
Oh, it's so nice to be here and to give you all a sneak preview at the Aud Boot Camp. So before we jump into it, I want to talk about what it takes to pass Aud. You know, you need to understand auditing theory, and you need to be able to apply that theory to given situations. So for example, you might be asked to identify the risk of material misstatement that is present in a company that is growing rapidly, much faster than its peers. This kind of question doesn't have an easy answer that can be memorized. Instead, you need to understand what the question is really asking and then be able to figure out how to get the answer from the information that's provided. As Madeline pointed out, you're going to need good test taking skills. And I don't know about you, but when I was working in all my different jobs, I did not take multiple choice questions when I was at work. And I wasn't answering TBSs, although perhaps I was applying my skills. So these are skills that you really need to work on. And because you haven't used them for some time, they are going to take some brushing up. And then remember, you're going to need to be able to concentrate and focus for 4 hours on really exciting auditing multiple choice questions and TBSs. So the boot camp is going to be laid out so that we'll cover about half of the audit process in the first session, and then we'll cover the remaining half of the audit process in the second session. We're going to work through the steps in the audit process to review key testing areas. So for example, we'll be looking at how you plan an audit, or how you evaluate internal controls, or the risk of material misstatement. Our goal for the workshop is to maximize your score on AUD. So we'll spend most of our time on multiple choice questions and TBSs. The QIDs for these questions will be provided in case you want to look them up in the UWorld database. Now, the most value will be obtained if you are able to attend and participate in person, because that way you can test your knowledge and understanding and ask questions, because and your questions are always really good ones. You may not understand a term, you may not understand a concept, or you might have missed something. And this way you can ask a question while you're taking the question, get it answered, and really solidify your understanding. Now, participants in the boot camp are likely to be at different stages of their studies and readiness. So you can use it in many different ways. You can use the boot camp to get a heads up on the material before you tackle it, or you can use the boot camp to review what you've learned and verify your understanding. Because the sessions are recorded, it'll be possible to take a look later and review the material again, or to view a session that you were unable to attend. Next slide, please. We're going to work our way through the major areas of the audit process with a focus on frequently tested areas and common problem areas. So I use a polling box so that when my multiple choice questions come up, you're going to be able to answer, you're going to be able to select an answer, A, B, C, or D, during our live session. That way, we can check on your understanding of terminology, we can check on your understanding of concepts. If you get a question wrong, it's actually a good thing, because then we can figure out why. Was it because you focused on the wrong word? Was it because you missed a key word? Did you read the question too quickly so that you missed, the word accept or not? So I do that all the time. So we'll be working on both your content knowledge and on your test taking skills. Next slide, please. So studying for AUD is a building process. You start with terminology and concepts and add how to audit to that foundation. Then you apply your knowledge to the different fact scenarios that are presented. Now, one thing, it's only a 4-hour workshop, so we can't cover everything. But by focusing on the frequently tested areas and the common problem areas, you can be sure that you're looking at content that is very likely to appear in the exam. Now, here's the audit process that's going to provide the foundation for our boot camp review. The audit process begins with client acceptance, followed by planning, obtaining an understanding, assessing risk and selecting procedures to perform, performing the procedures, evaluating the evidence collected, and finally preparing and issuing the report. And then, of course, the ethical requirements are present throughout the entire audit process. Next slide, please. So here's a sample of a topic that's covered. A major step in the audit process is to gain an understanding of the client, including its internal control, because you need to know where material misstatements are likely to occur so that you can plan the audit accordingly. In gaining the understanding, you're going to need to look at the client's business model, its operations, the ownership, whether the entity is subject to SOX requirements. You're going to need to look at the environment that the client operates in. So the industry, whether it's subject to regulation, the presence of technology, and the speed at which changes occur in that environment. It also includes the client's internal control, but focusing primarily on internal controls over the financial reporting process. So here's a question for you. Next slide, please. For effective internal control, the accounts payable department generally should A, stamp, perforate, or otherwise cancel supporting documentation after the payment is mailed. B, ascertain that each requisition is approved as to price, quantity, and quality by an authorized employee. C, obliterate the quantity ordered on the receiving department copy of the purchase order. D, establish the purchase agreement of the vendor's invoice with the receiving report and purchase order. All right, so what do you think? A, B, C, or D, right? And so this is a question that, you know, with the polling box in the actual boot camp, you would be able to select your answer. Next slide, please. All right, so the answer is D, matching the vendor invoice with the receiving report and the purchase order. Next slide, please. Now, why is D the best answer? You have to take a look at the accounts payable process. Accounts payable receives the purchase order, the receiving report, and the vendor invoice, matches those documents, and then issues a payment voucher. A different department, Treasury, is responsible for issuing the check, while yet another department, General Accounting, records the payment. Now, one thing to point out here, notice that this is the explanation that you would see if you took this question, you know, in UWorld. Notice that there's a lot of additional information here. There's not just the answer to the question. So this is where UWorld helps you review things that you might have forgotten, or provides you additional information if maybe you hadn't seen it before. So you're able to build your background while you're taking the question. You're provided with detailed information about the accounts payable process, as well as internal controls needed in that process, not just the answer to the question. Now, by the time you've finished the question and gone through the explanation, you will have reviewed the disbursement transaction cycle, both the processing steps and the internal controls that are present. You will have refreshed and expanded your knowledge, so you're better equipped to successfully tackle future questions on this or related areas. Next slide, please. So now we can go back to the question and determine why the other answers were not as good. So remember, when you're taking multiple choice questions, there are a lot of answers. There may be more than one answer that sounds correct or sounds like a good thing, but you're looking for the best answer. So A, marking the supporting documents so they can't be reused. Well, that's a good thing, right? I mean, that's an important control, but it would be performed by Treasury, not by accounts payable. B, making sure that the purchase requisition is properly approved is also important, but it would be performed by the purchasing department. Again, not accounts payable. And then C, obliterating the quantity ordered on the receiving department copy of the purchase order, that's actually kind of silly. You know, it's true, a blind copy of the purchase order can be an important element in the control system, but the blind copy is normally prepared automatically by the system. A blind copy is simply one where the quantities do not appear. So again, it's normally created automatically by the system when the purchase order is prepared. It doesn't take a person to go in and mark everything out with a magic marker or something. So that leaves D, matching the documents as the best answer. So this is a frequently tested area. The examiners love internal controls and they love segregation of duties. It's also a common problem area for students. The problem occurs because your understanding of accounts payable may be influenced by what you've seen at work, right? What you've seen at work or what you've seen at different employers that you've had. And the business world that's envisioned by the examiners, the CPA examiners, differs greatly from what you're likely to have encountered. The CPA exam business world is a world filled with large corporations and with many different departments and the ability to segregate duties across those departments. So once you know that, you can successfully tackle a question like this and get to the best answer. Next slide, please. So let's try one more on audit reports. You know, at the end of the audit, the auditor has to evaluate the work done and the evidence collected, and then decides on the report to be issued, including the opinion and any other paragraphs to be added to the report. So you'll see here in the audit process, we're down at the final steps in that process. So next slide, please. Here's the question. An auditor was unable to obtain sufficient appropriate evidence concerning certain transactions due to an inadequacy in the entity's accounting records. The auditor would choose between issuing a qualified opinion and an unmodified opinion with an other matter paragraph, an unmodified opinion with an other matter paragraph and an adverse opinion and a disclaimer of opinion, or a disclaimer of opinion and a qualified opinion. All right, what do you think? A, B, C, or D? So keep that thought in mind. Next slide, please. And the answer was D, a disclaimer of opinion and a qualified opinion. Now, next slide, please. So the thing to remember or to recognize when you're answering questions like this is, what kind of a problem was it? When they're making the decision about what kind of opinion to render in an audit report, there are two kinds of problems that are considered: gap departures, where the gap rules were not followed, and scope limitations, where the auditor was unable to collect evidence considered necessary. So each type of problem, a gap departure or a scope limitation, leads to different choices in the types of opinions that can be rendered. So the best answer was D here, and why? Because the problem that was raised was a scope limitation. The auditor was unable to obtain evidence considered necessary. So once you know that it's a scope limitation, your choices are qualified or disclaimer, right? An adverse opinion is only issued when you have a really severe gap departure. So now that you know that, you can easily answer these and more questions, you know, because the reporting questions, a lot of them aren't difficult. You just have to recognize whether it's a scope limitation or a gap departure. And so review of the basic requirements and practice should be sufficient here to enable you to successfully answer these questions. So that's what we'll be doing in our boot camp, that plus TBSs. Now on the TBSs, we're not going to have enough time to fully work through all the TBSs, but we will have enough time to review them, talk about how to approach them, how to pull out information that you need, how to keep from getting panicked when you see all of this information and all of the exhibits or whatever that they might have included in a TBS. So the way you pass on is review and practice. You have to understand how the audit is conducted, get the basics down, and then build on that foundation and perfect your test taking skills. So I look forward to seeing you in the boot camp. Next slide, please.
Jeannie, I'm going to jump in because we had a few questions for you that I'd love for you to address.
Oh, okay.
So, the first one is, when should we take the boot camps? After we go through all the material and right before the exam, or during studying?
And see, that was one of the things I was sort of trying to point out earlier, because when you know, your study schedule might not necessarily totally coordinate with the dates that we are offering the boot camp. So you can use it either way, and it really will sort of depend on when you're planning to study. You can, if you use it, if you watch them before you're studying, or when you're in the middle of studying, you can use it as a heads up on the areas that you haven't hit yet. Because remember, I'm talking about common problem areas. So that would give you a heads up before you actually hit them in the material. If you have already finished all the lessons, then of course you can watch the boot camp then and use it as a review, as part of your review. Do I remember all this stuff? Can I easily answer those questions? Do I remember all of those points that were being covered as common problem areas or frequently tested areas? So there isn't one right answer. Figure out what will work with the study schedule that you are laying out and your planned testing date. Because one of the big things that I always end up needing to kind of, I don't know, nag people about is sign up for your testing date. I know for sure that you won't pass if you don't ever sit. So sign up, and then I will work with you through these boot camps to try and make sure that you pass. Okay, Julie, sorry, next question.
Okay, one more question. This person says, I've taken the last 2 of my exams, Aud and Reg, so congratulations.
Oh, wonderful.
But what am I supposed to be doing now while I've got 2 months waiting until my scores are released in June? Oh, the waiting is the hardest part.
It really is. It was so hard for people this year, but I am thrilled that you've passed those 2 parts. And if you want, you can go ahead and start studying for the next one. I don't know how you felt when you finished your 2 sections. If you felt like you'd, done a decent job. I know you never feel perfectly 100% like, yes, I was a superstar, but you could go ahead and start studying for your next section. So, and Peter,
these were their last 2 sections, so maybe they should just sit back and celebrate.
Oh, these are the last 2 sections. Oh, I'm sorry, I misunderstood. Yeah. Well, yes, I would be tempted to celebrate, but let's just wait.
That's it. Let's keep going.
All right. Thank you, Jeannie. Really appreciate it. And now bringing you Peter Olinto.
Thank you, Mad. Great job, Jeannie. All right, future certified public accountants, how are you today? So yes, I get the pleasure of walking you through FAR. So FAR a little bit different than audit, actually totally different than audit. Audit, little to no math involved. So that's kind of the good news. You can get through the audit a little bit more quickly. But the fact that there's no math involved, that's also the bad news because it doesn't add up. Sometimes those theory-based questions could be harder than they seem. The good news is if you put the time and effort in with FAR, because it is math intensive, things add up. So for the most part, you do your practice, you should do really well. Similar to audit, we have the 2 sessions. What we start off with is the multiple choice. The multiple choice, as you all know, is a great way to cover a lot of ground without getting, a mile deep in the topic. You can cover a lot, but obviously the highest level of application is going to be the task-based simulations. So the key is what I recommend for FAR, BAR, and even the tax, but I'll defer to Suzanne on that. With the math intensive topics, you really want to make sure that before you go to the task-based simulations, you're very comfortable with the subject matter, because as I tell people all the time, even if it were an open book exam, the task-based simulations would be very challenging because of the volume of information that's thrown at you. So you really want to do the multiple choice, get a good feel for the subject matter. What are the key formulas? What was emphasized in the lecture? What did you see emphasized in the multiple choice? Nail down those key concepts, and then you'll apply it to the task-based simulation. So you'll get a little feel for how we're going to do that in the boot camps in just a little bit. By the way, mark your calendar. Yes, I'm going to throw in a little plug. Saturday, April 27th, you like bonds. If you want to learn about bonds, I'm going to be doing a sample lecture free to the public. So you don't need to be a UWorld student yet, but you will be. But so if you're interested in learning about bonds and how that's tested, both in terms of multiple choice, task-based simulation, how we kind of introduce the subject matter. So as Madeline already referenced, the boot camps are kind of higher level in terms of its right to problem solving. But how we introduce the subject matter, that's going to be in the pre-recorded lectures. You'll get a feel for how we do that Saturday, April 27th. So I'll be walking you through the bonds in addition to doing some practice multiple choice. Test taking tips, that's a lot of what we'll do with the multiple choice and task-based simulation. So I will show you rather than tell you about that. We're going to cover all the topics. We're not going to go through those definitions and terminology. I don't want to waste your valuable study time covering things that are more remembering and understanding. Like, you're not going to see me cover a question that says cash collected from customers. Is that operating, investing, or financing? I'd be wasting your valuable study time. So we'll do the more math intensive. Can you calculate the cash collected from customers? And then an individual multiple choice might focus in on, hey, can you calculate cash flow from investing? Whereas a task-based simulation puts it all together and says, hey, get me change in cash. So they'll give you a full-blown income statement, balance sheet, maybe some different notes, and you've got to be able to do your operating, investing, financing, net it all out, get your change in cash, you had your beginning cash, get your ending cash. So whether it's consolidated financial statement of cash flow, notes, bonds payable, all that good stuff, we will cover a lot of those topics, combination of multiple choice as well as task-based simulations. Much like audit, we're going to make sure all the question IDs are provided for you so that just in case afterwards you want to take a look, you can certainly take a free peek there. Next slide, please. You know, I want you to take a good look at the topics here. So people are asking, should I do the boot camp before the lecture, after the lecture? I say, why not do it both? Sometimes when you study for math intensive topics where, you know, it's, you know, you haven't seen it a while since school, whatever it may be, maybe you got a B in intermediate or a C, now we'll get you the P and the A. But, you know, sometimes you feel intimidated, right? It's for some people, they would rather go through the lecture first, have us walk you through the topic, do some practice questions, you try some multiple choice, and then you come to the boot camp kind of relatively prepared. But there are a good number of students as well, and I was this way with heavily tested topics that were math intensive. Sometimes, you know, I like to sneak peek and say, ultimately, how do I solve this problem? Like, what's the major issue? What do I need to be on the lookout for when I watch that lecture? So we do have a fair number of students who don't get intimidated and say, you know what, I'll watch the boot camp, get a feel for what the critical issues are, and then the lectures will kind of like resonate in the sense that, oh, that's why this is being emphasized. Oh, I get it now. That's why, you know, that saw that issue in that question. That's why this is being emphasized in the lecture. But we do want to cover it so that obviously it's pretty much evenly split. So as you see the topics there, you know, you can watch these boot camp 1, boot camp 2, depending upon, you know, your comfort level. You know, you might want to do it before you watch the lecture, after you watch the lecture. But we try to do a good job in covering all the heavily tested topics. I do want to caution you though, the boot camps are not sufficient. I will repeat, not sufficient to have you prepared. These 2 boot camps are practice and application, reinforcement, highlight certain issues, make sure you know what the key issues are, but not sufficient to be totally prepared, as you all know. Next slide, please. So what we do is much like we do in audit. The difference is because it's so math intensive. Now, they would not give me writing privileges tonight. If you're already enrolled in UWorld, you know I'm a big believer in the more senses you engage, the more likely it is you're going to be able to retain that information. So I do a lot of writing during my lectures, and as I go through the boot camps, I do a lot of writing, but I was not given writing privileges tonight, and I understand why. Everybody wants to be home by Tuesday afternoon. So what I wanted to do tonight, solving the problem is incidental. A lot of what we do in terms of teaching you the strategy is showing you, so like, you know, here's a multiple choice question, relatively, you know, 7-8 lines there in terms of a paragraph, but it's still inundated with information. So a lot of people are going to start this question November 30, year 1, parlor purchase for cash, $15 per share, 250,000 shares of the outstanding stock. Immediately, it's like information overload. And then you're going to start seeing, okay, the balance sheet, the carrying value. Ultimately, what is it that they want you to do with those facts? So I call it legalized cheating. So what we will do with every single question in the boot camp is we're going to read it backwards. We're going to start with the question stem, And then we're gonna set it up before we even read the facts, just by virtue of the question stem. You know what this is gonna trigger? Hey, what's the formula to calculate that? We're gonna write down the formula in its entirety. You'll see what I mean by that. And then we'll read the facts in context and plug in as we go. So for example, we start with the last line. November 30, year one, consolidated balance sheet. What should Parlor report as goodwill? So the very first thing we're gonna do, start with the question stem and say, hey, how do we calculate goodwill? So the first thing we need is the purchase price. So we're gonna write down the purchase price, right? And you might pay cash, you might issue your stock for their stock, or you might issue debt. So I'll remind you, the purchase price could be funded in a variety of ways. Here we wanna make sure we know the purchase price. And then I wanna know, did I buy all of their stock or did I only buy some of their stock? Obviously, if we're consolidating, we're gonna review, well, hey, that means we must have control. What's evidence of that control? Hey, we own more than 50% of that voting stock. But we're gonna do our purchase price, and if I did not buy 100% of their stock, I've got to read in the facts, well, what's the fair value of the non-controlling interest? You're going to see that doesn't apply in this set of facts, but who cares? We want to review the rule in its entirety. So we're going to take the purchase price plus the fair value of any non-controlling interest, and if it doesn't apply, that'll be not applicable, NA. We'll get our total fair value. And then we're going to set up our formula. Hey, what's the fair market value? Not the carrying value. The fair market value of that identifiable equity. And then we'll review, hey, what the hell do we mean by identifiable equity? Well, we want to look at the company we're buying and we want to look at their balance sheet. And I want to see all the assets and liabilities, not only what's on the balance sheet, but things that might be buried in the notes in a task-based simulation that's off the balance sheet. Whether it's on or off the balance sheet, if it has a value and we can identify it, I want to make sure I'm mindful of that. So it's the fair market value of my identifiable assets on or off the balance sheet minus the fair market value of my identifiable liabilities on or off the balance sheet. That gets you the fair market value of your identifiable equity. And then we'll remember, hey, what the hell, what's an off balance sheet asset? Well, you might have in process R&D. You might have a situation where the company, pharmaceutical company, they've invested a lot in R&D. But you know what? They do not yet have a product that they can manufacture for resale. They're still researching it. Bottom line is, though, it may not have a carrying value per gap, but it might nonetheless have a fair value. I want to consider that. What's a liability that might be off the balance sheet? Company might have been named as a defendant in a lawsuit. They have not booked a liability. They haven't accrued for anything. Maybe they don't think the loss is probable or they can't reasonably estimate it, whatever. They'll tell you in the notes, hey, we think the value of that potential liability is X. All of that will be considered. So we set up our formula. What did we pay? Plus the fair value of the non-controlling interest, total fair value for 100% of this company, minus the fair market value of the identifiable equity. There's our goodwill. So we're going to set up the formula, then we're going to plug it in. Here, what did they pay? $15 a share. And do you all see the last word in the first line? They bought all 250,000 shares. They own 100%. That means the fair value of the non-controlling interest is zero, but at least we remember that's a major issue. So we're going to take our 250,000 shares times the $15. We'll solve for that. Purchase price, $3,750,000. Fair value of non-controlling interest, zero. So that means the total fair value is the $3,750,000. Now, let me find the fair market value of the identifiable equity. So then we continue to read. Well, on the balance sheet, the carrying value, the book value is $3 million. That's nice, but I need the fair value. Well, they tell me the PP&E, the fair value exceeded the book value by $400,000, and they have a trademark where the fair value is $75,000. So what we want to do is we want to go from that book value, $3 million, and then we want to add in anything where the fair value is in excess of the book value. We got the $400,000 plus the 75, $475. We'll add it together. The fair market value of that identifiable equity, $3,475,000. But we didn't pay $3,475,000. What did we pay? 250,000 shares at $15 a share. We'll do the math. $3,750,000 minus the $3,475,000. What is that? I don't know. Why did you pay that excess? I don't know, but we can't have something called I don't know. So we give I don't know a name. It's called goodwill. Alrighty, and then we'll solve for our goodwill, and the 3,750,000 minus the 3,475,000, you'll see 275,000. So using this one question, we want to review the rule in its entirety, but we're going to be putting the pen to the paper. What you write, you will remember, okay? So make sure you do your hand exercises because you're going to be doing a lot of writing with me. Next slide, please, Matt. Thank you. Next slide, 275. You can do the next one. And now, just like an audit, one of the things, and in my 25, 30-year history in CPA review, one of the things that stood out about UWorld is the time and effort they put into their detailed explanatory answers. So while we'll be solving it live together, they love to give these detailed explanatory answers with the pictorial so you can visualize, hey, when we pay that $3,750,000, how much is that for things that we can identify? So part of that is for the carrying value of what you purchased, the book value. So while we paid $3,750,000, we'll remind you, hey, $3 million of that was for the book value, but we didn't pay $3 million, we paid $3,750,000. What was the other $475,000 for? Oh yeah, the excess of the PP&E over fair value and the trademark, that was $475,000. So I could see paying $3,475,000. What was the rest for? Oh yeah, the goodwill. And then I will remind you of some issues. When you consolidate the balance sheet, you're going to have to insert goodwill onto the consolidated balance sheet. So you'll have those key things to remember and all the takeaways. So lots and lots of exciting stuff to look forward to. Next slide, please, Matt. Now, we would be doing you a disservice if we just covered the multiple choice. So the task-based simulation, that is nothing more than maybe 5 questions, multiple choice, all squeezed together into a task-based simulation. As Jeannie already mentioned, it's information overload. So a lot of candidates get nervous. Oh my God, where do I start? Legalized cheating. We always start with, what do they want me to do with these facts? Lots of times when there are multiple parts to a task-based simulation and you have X number of minutes, there are certain parts of that that could be answered without even looking at the facts. Okay, so for example, next slide, please, Matt. Without even looking at that first exhibit. Next slide, please. We've got another exhibit. Here. Calculate the amounts that are going to appear on the consolidated balance sheet. So we've got the cash. I don't know any numbers. Hey, the goodwill. We just covered that in the multiple choice. So if I'm taking the exam, before I even read the facts, what are we setting up? Purchase price for whatever percent I purchased. If I didn't buy 100% of it, what am I on the lookout for? The fair value of any non-controlling interest, total fair value for 100% of the company. Then what do we want to subtract from that? The fair market value of the identifiable equity. And what are we left with? The goodwill. So I'm going to write down my formula for that. Equipment, we got to see the numbers. The consolidated balance sheet, common stock, wait a second. We eliminate, and I'll go through all the eliminating entries with you, all the journal entries required, the acronym that I give, EAGLE IN. I'll show you what that means when you get there. You'll be very excited about that. But we're going to go through the eliminating entries, the intercompany transactions one by one. But I remember I'm getting rid of the subsidiary's equity. So the common stock, hey, that's a piece of cake. That's just going to be the parent company's common stock. So there's no math involved. I'm going to answer that first and put that number in there. Investment in S, the investment, wait a second, when the parent company makes an investment in another entity, before they consolidate, the parent and the subsidiary have their own independent financial statements. On the parent standalone financial statements, they'll have the investment in the subsidiary. But one of my eliminating entries is to get rid of the investment in the subsidiary, and instead we want to pick up their assets and liabilities. So the investment in S, hey, that's 0. There's no math involved, nothing to even look at. That answer is going to be 0 on the consolidated financials. I look at the next one, dividends. The only dividends that are going to be relevant are the parent dividends. The subsidiaries dividends that are paid to the parent company and then to the non-controlling interest, they're not going to appear in that consolidated financial statement. So we're going to see that the dividends are just going to be the parent only. Bonds payable, I'm going to have to calculate. Non-controlling interest we'll have to calculate, and we'll set up. We will have also done multiple choice in that boot camp, leading up to non-controlling interest. The non-controlling interest, what was that beginning investment plus their minor percentage of the income minus their percentage of dividends? We'll review how to calculate that. But right up front, legalized cheating, I can answer. To calculate the goodwill, we'll cover that because we just did that. But the common stock parent only, investment in S, 0, and then the dividends parent only. Please go back one slide, Matt. Thank you so much for going backwards. You know me, I'm always backwards. So when I'm doing my answer, you ready? Common stock, going to be the parent only. So you see we got P, the PO, that's the parent. Shaw is going to be the subsidiary. The common stock is going to be the parent only, 100,000. The dividends paid, the only thing that's going to be relevant is the 80,000. So just like that, we have 3 answers. Actually, we have more. The investment in S is going to be 0. We have the common stock. That's going to be the parent only. The dividends, that's going to be the parent only. 3 answers right up front makes you feel comfortable. Now we could spend more time on the calculations. Go back to the prior slide if you would, Matt. And without putting the pen to the paper, but just to set this up like we would in the boot camp, but we're going to be writing everything out step by step by step. But to build your confidence, now as you read the facts, we know what to do. So attached are selected unconsolidated financial statements of PO Corp. They bought 90%. Stop right there. What's the non-controlling interest? 1 minus the 90%, 10%. So I want to know, what was the purchase price for that 90% stake? So I look at my first bullet. They bought 90% of the 100,000 shares. They bought 90,000 shares. What did they pay? 155,000. We just found our purchase price for 90%. What's the next step in our process? Hey, tell me what's the value of that 10% non-controlling interest. The fair value in the second line, non-controlling interest, $1.70 a share. If we bought 90,000 shares, then we didn't buy the other 10,000. 10,000 times $1.70, 17,000. So without even writing it down, the purchase price, $155. Plus the fair value of the other 10%, 17. Well, that's 172,000. What are we looking to subtract now? The fair market value of the identifiable equity. Well, they tell me their stockholders' equity, 150. The fair value is the same thing as the carrying value. Beautiful. 155 plus 17, 172 total fair value for 100% of that company. We purchased 90. The other 10% was that non-controlling interest. That's why when you do multiple choice, you review the rule in its entirety, because we knew when we set it up, it's not just the purchase price. It's the purchase price plus the fair value of the non-controlling interest. Total fair value for 100%, 172. What's the fair market value of the identifiable equity? 150, leaving us goodwill of how much? 22. How do you do? So look, it's all about setting it up. And it's about time saving. 2 people can work the same question, multiple choice, both people get it right. But one person gets it right in 30 seconds, somebody else took 4 minutes and 30 seconds. So part of it's going to be reviewing the rule in its entirety and then what's the best way to get to the right answer. And then the task-based simulation, hey, how do I set this all up? Okay, and apply that knowledge you've gained exam day. So you might want to watch it before you do the lecture, kind of set you up. What are the key points I got to be mindful for when I watch the lecture? And then at the highest level of application is after the lecture, then you're ready to practice and apply. So you can watch it beforehand, you can watch it afterwards. There's no presumption of prior knowledge, folks. While I do the boot camps, I will not say, oh, you should know. If you knew already, you wouldn't be watching the boot camp, okay? So we're going to walk you through everything you need to know. Man, oh man, Suzanne, I feel like I'm giving birth to a financial accountant. Can you believe it? You got to love it. Next slide, please. Next slide, Suzanne, you're up. Get ready. Get ready. So you can go, yep. Any questions for me, Julie?
We do have one question for you, Pete.
That's it. All I get is one?
Well, one question and a comment, a very nice comment. It says, Peter Olento helped me pass FAR in my first attempt last year. I love the way he demystifies complex accounting topics based on simple explanations. So
that's my mom. That's my mom. My mom typed that in. Don't believe me.
She's so sweet to come tonight.
Tell you. And she died 11 years ago too. God bless you, Mom. Thank you.
Okay, here's the question. which section would you recommend taking first?
Hardest one in, first one out is a general rule of thumb. Financial, very academic. Intermediate 1, intermediate 2, advanced accounting. You're probably not going to see a lot of this stuff day in, day out of practice. So while it's relatively fresh in your mind, if you're still in school, I would get financial out of the way first. Then if you're going audit, I would do reg next because you're not going to see that in practice. Then I would do your audit, then your ISC or your bar. Okay, that's what I would do. If you're a tax person, I would do FAR first, then audit for all the same reasons you're not going to see that. And then I would leave your all your good stuff, your regulation, and then your TCP. Yeah, you know me, for last.
All right, thanks for your insight on that.
Go, Suzanne. I'm passing a baton. Here we go.
I got it. I just grabbed it. I got that baton. Thank you. Hi, I'm Suzanne Youngberg, and I'm going to be leading you through the best, most fun section of the CPA exam, and that is regulation. So regulation has 3 parts to it. Hey, Peter, yay! Regulation has 3 parts to it. You've got your ethics and professional responsibilities, you have business law, and then you also have tax. And for our boot camps, boot camp 1, boot camp 2, we're just going to be covering tax. So I just wanted to make sure that we made that clear. Now, successful tax professionals, are key strategic partners with business owners. And to meet those challenges and opportunities, they have to have a variety of skills. And so whether that's problem solving or analytical skills or dealing with ambiguity, we're trying to walk you through all of that while studying for the reg section of the CPA exam. It is involving a lot of information that we want you to learn and to be able to be successful in passing that part. Now, for reg, we do have 2 instructors. So we have myself, and then we also have Dr. Greg Carnes, and he wishes he could be here tonight, but he had a conflict. But he will be joining us for our Boot Camp 1 and our Boot Camp 2. So looking at this first slide here, let's talk a little bit about how we are setting it up for reg, which is a little different than what Jeannie did for aud and what Peter is doing for FAR. So Boot Camp 1 is an overview of 8 chapters, and then Boot Camp 2 is going to be a deep dive. So we have selected 4 highly testable areas to go over with you in Boot Camp 2. Just like our other sections, obviously our goal is to make sure that we maximize your score on reg. You don't need 100%. We need to get you to pass, and we want you to feel confident walking into that exam. Of course, our question ID numbers will be provided for easy reference later on so that you could go back and review. Next slide, please. All right, so let's talk a little bit about Reg Boot Camp 1. So again, I had mentioned that that is covering 8 chapters. And so we are looking at highly tested areas of taxation. Now, that doesn't mean it's the most difficult. It also doesn't mean it's the easiest. It is the most testable, and what we feel, what Greg and I feel, you definitely need to know walking in to take that exam. Now, Greg and I will be alternating chapters. So for Boot Camp 1, actually he starts, I believe. So he would go, then I would go, and then he would go, and then I would go. And we'll be alternating, and we'll get through those 8 chapters together with that overview. Now, the great thing about having 2 presenters is that while Greg is speaking, I will be manning the chat box and answering any questions. So we encourage you to ask as many questions, anything that comes to mind while Greg is speaking, and then I'll be answering the questions. If there's something I want the whole audience to know, I'll present that to Greg as well at the end, and we'll be able to address that. Then obviously, while I'm speaking and covering a section, he'll be manning the chat box and he'll be answering your questions too. So we should be able to get through all of your questions by the time that we're done with those 2 hours. Now, we have coverage listed there. You can see basis of assets and cost recovery, loss limitations, gross income for individuals, and a whole slew of other related topics. So we just listed a few. How we will set it up for Boot Camp 1 is that we're going to give you a brief overview of a topic, and then we're going to get into the multiple choice question. We want to make sure that you are using those critical thinking skills, those analytical skills, so that you're successful in getting the right answer. And just like the other presenters mentioned, obviously we will be covering some test taking tips. Both Greg and I have decades of teaching experience. And so even though we can't see you, all right, and see the blank stare maybe on your face, we know areas that have caused students problems in the past. And so we make sure that we've selected areas to cover those and selected multiple choice questions to make sure that you feel comfortable in those areas. Next slide, please. All right, boot camp 2. So now we do take a little bit different approach here in Reg. We're doing a deep dive, and I mean deep dive, into 4 Reg areas. All right, now the material is different than what you saw in boot camp 1. So we want you to come to both sessions because it's completely different material. I want to make sure that I emphasize that, because in boot camp 2, we're doing a deeper dive into those 4 areas. So I'm actually covering area 1. And so I'll be looking at book to tax differences, you know, our schedule M1. I'll be covering C corporations and all of those related topics. Then Greg is going to step in and he's going to do a deep dive on S corporations and partnerships and all that that entails. So there'll be a lot of information being covered, but a deeper dive. So looking at it, you know, not a cursory overview, but rather really getting into it and making sure that you understand that material for those 4 topics. Now, the other presenters have talked about task-based simulations. In Reg, it's 50% of your Reg exam. So we need you to get comfortable with these. I'm not sure if it was Peter, if it was Jeannie who was talking about, you know, no one walks around in their practice doing multiple choice questions. At least a task-based simulation is supposed to replicate your higher learning skills. And so Peter had mentioned it could be several tasks that you're asked to do. So it could be that you have, you know, the narrative, then you have the question stem, and then you have maybe 4 or 5 different tasks that they're asking you to do. So then it becomes all about your approach. And we're going to be talking about how to approach those task-based simulations so that you're successful. Someone else had mentioned, you know, trying not to be overwhelmed. There can be a lot of exhibits. And what we're going to do in our section when we're talking about the TBSs for Reg is how to eliminate unnecessary information. You know, what's relevant, what's not relevant. How can I get to the answer just a little bit more quickly here while going through the multitude of exhibits that you might see. Now, the good thing about tax is that you are looking at actual source documents. So it could be a W-2, you know, a 1099, it could be a divorce agreement, it could be a balance sheet, it could be an Excel spreadsheet, but everything, a purchase order, you know, everything is a real source document, and then you have to incorporate that and then answer those different questions. So we want to make sure that we go through TBSs with you so that you're successful in approaching and then efficiently completing those TBSs. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is a sample boot camp 1 topic. So I had mentioned that with boot camp 1, we're going to do an overview. So cost recovery just happens to be one of my topics, which is why I selected this slide. This is an overview. Because we're getting short on time here, I'm just going to briefly go over through, you know, what our approach would be, and then certainly get into the detail of it when we actually have boot camp 1. We're all familiar with cost recovery. We're going to be discussing, you know, what is Section 179? How do we work with bonus? What's maker's depreciation? What assets apply to what? What conventions can we use? Mid-year, when does mid-quarter apply? And then mid-month, what's that? And what types of assets do that apply to? So we're setting the stage. We're giving you the overview of the topic of cost recovery. Next slide, please. Then we'll get into the multiple choice questions. Now, this multiple choice question is theoretical. In tax, we have the best of both worlds because we have theoretical questions and we also have our computational questions. This is theoretical. I don't have time to go through the whole thing, but it's asking for how many months of depreciation can Quanti company claim for year 4. When we go through this problem in the boot camp, we'll be explaining what to look for in the narrative. So Peter had talked about reading the question stem. Totally agree. What is it? What are we looking for? Go back to the narrative, pick out some important things. Oh my gosh, look at that. The purchase was on December 21st. Calendar year? That should trigger something in me. No other assets were purchased during the year. I'm thinking I'm leaning towards mid-quarter convention here. So understanding what to look for by reading the stem and then by reading the narrative. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. All right, as you can see, we have our explanation, and UWorld does a fantastic job of laying this out for you. They start off with the illustration, all right? Then they get into a little bit of a description of what is being covered, all right, for this area, describing briefly what makers is, what your different conventions are, just to kind of give you a little bit of a refresher. And then it finally gets into describing mid-quarter convention and why that is the appropriate answer here. But that wasn't what the question actually was asking for. It was asking for number of months. But if you think about that, mid-quarter, if I have a quarter, I got 3 months, half of that, mid-quarter, would be 1.5 months, which ended up being our correct answer. I do like the way UWorld puts together the things to remember section. To me, what this shows me is something to put on a note card. Let's say I'm taking the, I'm getting ready. It's, last hours, and I'm just kind of flipping through some note cards. Things to remember would be good things to put down on a note card to try to remind you later on. Next slide, please. If it sounds like I'm hurrying, it's because I am. I want to make sure that we get a few minutes of time to talk about our wrap up here. But one thing I wanted to point out here with this other multiple choice question for Boot Camp 1, notice the difference. It's computational. It's not theoretical, it's computational. So when you're reading through this, you're looking at that question stem first. What was Sounds Makers deduction for the office building in that year? Makers, office building. Those two things right there tell me a lot about what the problem is going to be asking me, and I haven't even read the narrative yet. So when I think of office building, I go, oh, okay, realty, and I've got myself non-residential realty. So I kind of have an idea of where to go when I go back and read the narrative. So they do give you the information. They talk about what the building costs, but they also mention land. So when we're going through this question live in Boot Camp 1, I'd be telling you, how do you calculate depreciable basis? Because that's going to be key to make sure that we get the correct answer in our computation. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. All right, and then again, here's our explanation. And so notice that they give you a table. We had mentioned that it was realty. You had to pick up on the fact that it was non-residential realty, because non-residential realty has a different useful life. It's 39 years. In the facts, they gave you the appropriate percentage that you needed to multiply by. I'll be telling you in the boot camp, they might not always do that. You might have to look up the table yourself. You're going to need to know that August is the 8th month of the year. So just because we present it one way doesn't mean that it couldn't get presented a different way. These are some of the test taking tips that we would be talking about in the reg section. They talk again a little bit about makers, the conventions, how to get to depreciable basis, and then finally the calculation itself. And you can see when they do the math, when they multiply, they ended up with 2,253. Now, another thing I wanted to just point out real quick here before we move on. Notice how they give an explanation for incorrect answers. A tremendous learning tool is by reading what is incorrect so that you now have a better understanding of why something is correct. Why is the other answer correct? You can read it and you can think to yourself, yeah, I get it, but maybe you don't. When you read the other answers, it helps you figure out where maybe you went wrong. And then that way, when you take and you look at a question like that again, you've got it. You're solid, you're ready to go. And again, they show you those things to remember, something to put down on a note card. Now, I went through my area very quickly, but I just wanted to give you an overview. We are so looking forward to seeing you at the Reg Boot Camp 1 and 2. Please remember that our Boot Camp 1 and 2 are completely different information, and there will be 2 of us that are communicating with you. I look forward to seeing you.
Dan, I just wanted to pop in to say, I think you covered it all great. Thank you. We don't have any questions, so we're going to wrap it up.
That's great. Thank you. Decades old, yes, approximately. Thanks, Pete. We will run through this very quickly. I just want to thank you all for joining us. Thank you to the presenters for your fantastic presentations. They are joined by this expansive team of subject matter experts. And yes, as Pete mentioned earlier, this is nothing to snuff at. This is a great team that you have working on the content, your instruction, throughout the entire course. They are writing those answer explanations that you saw. So fantastic team behind you. There for your success. And then finally, a quick recap on what the Elite Unlimited course includes, which is what these boot camps are a part of for the 2024 course. You have 3 core sections, all the cores that we mentioned today, plus the discipline of your choice. You get your digital and printed textbooks, over 8,000 multiple choice questions and task-based simulations. We've said it, expert-led video lectures, smart path predictive technology. Make sure that you are exam ready, get the data that you need to know that you are on track to passing. We have dynamic study planners, full-length practice exams, boot camps, and then the Elite Unlimited course also includes unlimited course access. So please check it out if you want to learn more about it. The QR code provided here and the link, you can find the latest discounts and learn all about all that we have to offer. And to get you to CPA, we have a 94% pass rate, so you can join that group of 94 that pass. And I want to just thank you all for giving us your time this evening. It's been a pleasure having you. And yes, Pete, 427 bonds, there will be an email going out with the information for registering for that free lecture. So please be on the lookout. If you received the information to join up for this free webinar today, then you should be on the list to receive that one as well. So keep an eye out for that. And I just want to thank you all so much. Julie, is there any final questions that we need to cover before we wrap up?
I don't think so. We had so many great questions. So thank you to everybody who came tonight.
Thank you. And we will send a recording of this webinar to everyone who registered, whether you attended or not, but you did attend. So thank you so much. Have a great night, and we'll all see you soon. Bye.